incredibly excited to introduce our next speaker for you today. Jim Al-Khalili is a renowned physicist, broadcaster, and author. He is currently working at the University of Surrey, studying theoretical quantum physics. He has written 12 physics books which have been translated into over 20 languages all around the world. But this year, he turned his hand to novel writing. And he published his first novel, Sunfall, in April of 2019. And he is here today to tell us more about that and his experience of writing novels. So please join me in giving a huge blue dot welcome to Professor Jim Al-Khalili.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Good afternoon, Blue Dot. Are you wet? Have you dried off? Someone's still wet. Yeah, it was good. I was hoping it was going to rain really hard and then just everyone here would just have to cram into this tent. So, James Burke said that scientists should really try to, particularly in broadcasting, try and entertain. You will scare people if you say E equals MC squared. Here's an interesting fact. You shouldn't say E equals MC squared. You should say E equals MC squared. You stress the C, not the squared. Otherwise, the M gets squared as well, and algebraically, it all just falls over. Okay, I take James Burke's point. Maybe we should not talk about the science too much. So, as Tony mentioned in the introduction, I have taken this foray into science fiction writing. So, normally, if I'm giving a science talk, I've got PowerPoint slides and stuff. This academic scientists like to be, they feel safer with PowerPoint. But I've done half a dozen events talking about the novel where basically I'm interviewed on stage, I'm sitting down, I'm comfortable, and it's an in-conversation sort of event where I'm asked questions. This is sort of a weird in-between thing where I've decided I don't have slides. This is just they said, you're going to have slides? I said, no, just put the backdrop picture of the book so people recognize it and they'll know to see it in bookshops and buy it. And I do this thing, all authors do this. I go into a bookshop and I see it and it's sort of in somewhere and there'd be sort of like several Brian Cox books on the side. And I pull it out and I sort of put it prominently and walk out. I haven't done the J.R. Hartley thing yet where you go up to the book. You have any books by Jim Al-Khalili? Just in case they recognize me and it's a bit embarrassing. So why would I venture into fiction writing? Well, I should say it wasn't planned. It's not something, we all talk about, oh, I've got a book in me. One day I'll write a novel or write a story. I guess when my kids were young, I would make up bedtime stories for them. But hey, lots of parents do that. It's not unusual. It doesn't mean I've got some sort of special talent. I certainly enjoyed reading science fiction growing up as a teenager, in particular, and in my 20s. So I read the books of Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Larry Niven, Robert Heinlein, people like that. A lot of them were what we'd call hard sci-fi or near-future science fiction. The sort of stuff, that takes place a few decades from now, not thousands of years into the future. It's the sort of thing that Hollywood actually does very well. If you think about sort of, Tom Cruise movie. I'm not a big fan of Tom Cruise. A bit creepy. But his movies are good. Sort of the Minority Report and the Mission Impossible type things. So Hollywood does this, tech, near-future science fiction very well. But since those books, the classics by Arthur C. Clarke and Asimov and others, there haven't been that many in this particular genre of science fiction. It seems now a lot of science fiction tends to be sort of fantasy, sort of far future galaxies far, far away. Very often, if it's about Earth, if it's about our future, it tends to be sort of a dystopian world where a virus has wiped out nearly everyone apart from a band of teenagers who've developed superpowers who go around killing zombies. And the Netflix after Netflix series is pretty much about that. But they're fine, they're good fun. My daughter's really keen on zombie films and series. She reckoned, she and her boyfriend reckoned they did reckon they were ready for the zombie apocalypse if it came. They knew exactly what they were going to do. But they were going to go out on a boat in the water until there was the prequel to The Walking Dead, where zombies can swim, apparently. Well, it sort of float around the water. So she realized that going out on a boat isn't safe, and she has to rethink her plan. But those sorts of... I enjoy those sorts of fantasy stories, but it's not something that I would have a particular talent in writing about. And so the natural topic for me to cover would be something based on the science that we know today, the emerging science that artificial intelligence, James Burke mentioned, nanotechnology, genetic engineering. There are lots of areas where we sort of know it's coming and try then and imagine a future world in which a lot of those technologies are realized. So that's something. It tends to be more reliable. And I knew, and I'll say a little bit about how actually the writing the book came about, but I knew if I was to write a science fiction book, I was going to make damn sure every bit of science was correct. Nothing violates the laws of physics. Now, hooray! Look, I'm not one of those people who gets very annoyed if a sci-fi movie gets some of the physics wrong. It sort of depends, I suppose it depends what sort of film it is. You don't go and watch the latest Marvel film and then, you storm off in anger because Spider-Man's broken the laws of physics. It's fantasy. You're not meant to believe it. But you can't believe the number of scientists who got so annoyed in the film Gravity with Sandra Bullock because her hair didn't float properly in zero gravity. That's terrible. I tend to think if it's science fiction, the clue is in the second word, right? It's fiction, it's made up, it's an imagined universe. It doesn't have to be true. But sometimes, if it's hard sci-fi, you want to believe it. You want that imagined world to be a possible future for us. And so, not only would you not want it to break the laws of physics, but you want it to somehow demonstrate the science that we think is going to be happening in the future. And that's what I decided I had to do with Sunfall. Okay, so how did it come about? As I mentioned in the introduction, I've written lots of popular science books, non-fiction. I'd never written any fiction, and I was at the launch party of one of my books, actually on the topic that I gave a talk here at bluedot last year on quantum biology. And we were at the launch party, and the publishers were very keen to say, so what's your next book, Jim? Right? Now we've got this one out of the way. What are you going to write next? And I hadn't thought about writing. I thought, come on, guys, give us a break. This is it's hard work writing a book. I've got a day job to do. And I said, well, I've got everything off my chest. I've written about quantum mechanics. I've written about space and relativity and the Big Bang. I've written about the history of science. I said, I don't know what else I'd write about. Maybe I'll write a novel. I said, oh, really? Oh, that's very interesting. What would it be about? So I don't know, I guess science fiction. Right, well, we'll put you in touch with our science fiction commissioning editor. And before I knew it, they'd arranged for this lunchtime meeting with a guy from Transworld Publishing, Simon Taylor, who wanted to know what I was going to write my novel about. And I had no idea. And I said, well, it'll have to be something, talking about something that I know. So I'm going to have to fill it with lots of physics. I suspect the lead characters will all be physicists. Is that all right? And it would probably be sometime in the future where a lot of the ideas that we're sort of thinking about now come to fruition. Now, of course, what helps me in this is that because of the nature of my work, I'm not the typical academic who spends all their life in the lab or in front of a computer screen or writing equations. I do, as many of us and the sorts of scientists that would come to bluedot and give talks, we tend to communicate science to the wider audience. And I've had, over the last 8 years now, the privilege of presenting a program, Radio 4, The Life Scientific, where I've talked to coming close to 200 scientists, including, actually, one of the organizers of bluedot, Tim O'Brien. And so I have spoken to and tried to sort of digest the science from, Helen Sharman's been on, a guest, Monica Grady's been on. So basically, that anyone here on stage, actually I haven't interviewed James Burke or Dallas Campbell yet. So I sort of have got to know what is the cutting edge science in all areas, from neuroscience to robotics to space research to geology to chemistry to maths. If I could remember it all, I'd be a polymath, but it's sort of, you remember one or two nuggets and then the rest is it just dissipates. But it has meant that I could fill my book with all these ideas that are exciting. Some of them are speculative, some of them we're not quite sure if they're going if they're right or not, but they could be. And when it comes to science fiction, the fact that it could be right is enough, right? It was tremendously liberating, actually, for me to write a novel, because when you're writing nonfiction, when you're writing, even more so when you're writing a scientific research paper, a peer-reviewed paper, to be published about your research, you have to be so sure, you have to back up what you're saying, you have to provide evidence, you have to provide references, you prove your theorems, you carefully do your measurements. When it comes to fiction, well, that's possible, great, go with it. And that I found tremendously liberating. But it meant that I had to have sort of a very different head on. So once I had accepted, and I think it was it was vanity. When they said, well, we'd write science fiction novel, there's no way I was going to say no. I'll think of something. When you think about, first-time authors, novelists, how hard it is to get published, how hard it is to persuade a publisher or literary agent to take your manuscript, your baby that you've maybe spent years and years and years crafting and modifying. I hadn't even done a creative writing course in my life. I've got O-level English, but the publishers knew I could write. Okay? So I've written a lot of nonfiction. That did not mean I could write fiction. And so they did take a chance on me. And Simon Taylor, my editor, said that, and he was true to his word, that he would roll his sleeves up and help me out. And this thing would evolve slowly. And sure enough, I'd send him an early draft, and I'd probably wait 2 or 3 months because he's got other books that he's dealing with, and then finally I'd get the feedback from him. And I swear that the first and second lots of feedback were each 20,000+ words. To the point you think, you write the book then, Simon. You are so much better at this than me. Why? Oh, no, Jim, you know the science. I just know how to write. Yeah, well, that's sort of important. And so Sunfall was born as an idea back in 2015, and it took 3 years to write, and then, of course, the time it takes to get it published. Look, I know there's going to be very few, but hands up, who's read Sunfall? It's the front row. Great, bless you. They got here first. The idea, the premise is very similar to the premise of a really awful Hollywood film called The Core, where the Earth's magnetic field is dying, and so scientists have to kickstart it. So they build this rocket ship that burrows down deep into the core of the Earth, a bit like Jules Verne, but it blasts with a laser beam or something, it vaporizes the rock in front of it, and they travel all the way to the core where they chuck a few nuclear bombs and kickstart it again. Stupid idea. Completely impossible. Whereas in Sunfall, it's absolutely feasible. Because, and this is one of the things I'm really proud of with the book, I figured out how you would do it realistically. You see, so this is the scenario in Sunfall, and what I'll tell you, I'm going to try very hard not to give you any spoilers, because you're all going to want to go off and buy it, obviously. It's funny, before I went on holiday a couple of weeks ago with my family, so my wife and I and our 2 children, David and Kate, both in their mid-20s and their other halves, and we had like pool holiday in Croatia, very lovely, very warm weather, but nice. My wife and my daughter had both read Sunfall, and my daughter liked it, and she told me she liked it, which is really nice, because she doesn't have to say that that's the only book of mine that she's even looked at, I think. No, that's not true. She has looked at a few others. But she was really keen for her brother and her boyfriend, her brother's girlfriend, to read the book as well. So she said, right, we're going to have a Sunfall quiz on holiday, and basically whoever loses has to buy dinner, and it's going to be a thing. Everyone has to read it. And so there was a point when we're sitting around the pool where there were 3 people reading my novel. And I can just imagine, that they were doing it because I was there. As soon as I turned my back and wandered off, oh, thank goodness for that, rubbish, and bring out something they really wanted to read. Anyway, where was I? So, yeah, I'm really proud of the premise of the book. The idea is, so we know that the Earth, our planet, is a giant magnet. We have a magnetic field. That's why a compass works, okay? We have a magnetic north and a magnetic south, and the Earth's magnetic field is vital for the survival of life on this planet. We think, we're not sure, but we believe that Mars also used to have a magnetic field, but for reasons we don't know, billions of years ago, that magnetic field died out. Whatever it was that was sustaining that magnetic field died out on Mars. Mars could have had an atmosphere. It could have had life. But without a magnetic field, which provides the bubble wrap around a planet, protecting it from the radiation from space, bombarding it, without that magnetic field, that radiation, those cosmic rays, would strip away the atmosphere and would destroy all life. And that's why there's no life on Mars now, because it has a bit of an atmosphere, but not much. And of course, it's exposed to radiation from space. Earth's magnetic field keeps us safe. So we're aware of, for example, the aurora borealis, the northern lights, or the aurora australis, the southern lights. That is light being given off from air molecules in the upper atmosphere when they're bombarded from space by these cosmic particles. The particles collide with these molecules of oxygen and nitrogen in the upper atmosphere and excite them, and then when they pump them with energy, basically, and then when they release that energy again, it comes out in different wavelengths of light as a light display. That's the northern light. So there's proof that the magnetic field exists, but also if it didn't exist, the compass wouldn't work. The compass needle would just float around. And the one thing we do know about the history of our planet is the Earth's magnetic field, every few 100,000 years, flips over. So the magnetic north becomes the magnetic south, and vice versa. And that process takes a bit of time. It doesn't happen overnight. And we know it's happened. It doesn't particularly affect life as far as we know, but there would be some disruption during the flipping process, because that's when the Earth's magnetic field gets much weaker and we're more exposed to the radiation from space. We are overdue a magnetic flip, okay? We're sort of way longer, hundreds of thousands of years late, overdue a magnetic flip. So it is quite feasible that it could happen. We also know the Earth's magnetic, the sort of north and southern poles are moving. The magnetic north has been drifting across sort of it doesn't coincide with the geographic North Pole. It's drifting, is it across Siberia now? I can't remember which way. But anyway, it's moving. You can imagine that this is the early stages maybe of the Earth's magnetic field weakening and flipping. So the premise of the story is that the Earth's magnetic field, people know it's getting weaker. The story is set in 2041. And yeah, I mean, climate change, and basically there are only so many disasters you can sort of throw into a book and before it gets very, very depressing. So I've sort of made it sound like climate change has happened, we've mitigated against the worst case scenario, but sea levels have risen and there's been mass migration of people from coastal areas around the world, so millions of people are moving around. So societies around the world are somewhat in turmoil. And they know that the Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker, but they think a flip is happening. And the idea is that there's one of the characters, in fact, she turned out to be everyone's favorite character in the book. By everyone, I mean everyone who's read it, obviously me and my editor and publisher. So she's a young Iranian computer scientist and a cyber hacker. And so this is in Iran post-Islamic revolution, right? So she's a bit of an anarchist, pink hair, piercings, lesbian, really self-confident, very self-assured about her ability. And she manages, using obviously a quantum computer, to uncover this conspiracy, this truth that's being hidden, that the Earth's magnetic field isn't getting ready for a flip, but it's actually dying. And the authorities don't know what to do about it. So they don't want to tell the world that it's really happening, chaos will ensue, as of course it does. And so the premise of the book is, how would you kickstart the Earth's magnetic field? Now, the Earth's magnetic field is generated by its liquid metal core. In the core of the Earth, where temperatures and pressures are so high, metal, iron, nickel, is in liquid form. It's melted, and it's processing, moving around inside the Earth's core. And because it's a liquid, because it's moving, it's conducting, and it generates electric field, which induces a magnetic field, and there's some feedback loops, and it's quite complicated geophysics that we're only now just starting to understand. So the basic idea is, why would the magnetic field of the Earth ever die? Because that liquid core somehow has slowed down, or it's not traveling in what's called laminar flow. It's all sort of rather turbulent and sort of all over the place. So how would you give it the boost of energy that it needs to get it going again without sending a rocket blasting a laser beam through the rock to get to the middle? How would you deliver energy to the center of the Earth without destroying all the stuff in between? You need something that will travel through the Earth as though the Earth were transparent. Now, we know of such particles. They're called neutrinos. And so every one of us now has millions of neutrinos streaming through our bodies from all directions because they interact very weakly with normal matter. But that's not interesting. Neutrinos are not quite sexy enough. I needed something that also saw the Earth as transparent, but somehow I don't want it to go through and then come out the other end. It's no good for anyone. I want it to be trapped in the core of the Earth. And so this is set in 2041, and two of the main heroes, I warned you, they are physicists. They are particle physicists. And by this point, we have discovered what the ingredients of dark matter is. Now, dark matter, we know there's much more, 5 times as much dark matter stuff in the universe as there is normal matter that makes up atoms and everything in the world. And dark matter, we only know it exists because it has a gravitational effect on normal matter. So we know, so the reason that when I jump up and fall down again, it's the Earth's gravity, the Earth's mass that's pulling me back down again. But that's not the only force that holds stuff together in our world. The electromagnetic force is what holds electrons within atoms and what holds atoms together to make molecules and molecules to make all stuff. Dark matter doesn't feel the electromagnetic force. That's why it's dark, because the electromagnetic force also involves absorbing and emitting light. Light just goes straight through dark matter as if it weren't there, because dark matter can't capture the particles, the photons, the particles of light. But it does have gravity. And that's how we know it's out there. It's holding galaxies together. Dark matter, you need it to explain why our universe looks the way it does. You need dark matter to explain how galaxies formed in the first place, how galaxies move relative to each other, how stars within galaxies move around without flying off. So we know it's there, but it doesn't interact with normal matter. So the premise of the book is they have discovered that dark matter is made of a certain type of elementary particle called not a neutrino, but a neutralino. You've heard it here. We don't know what dark matter is made of, but when they discover it's neutralino, say, oh yeah, I remember Jim Al-Khalili telling us about that in his novel. Wow, he's like Arthur C. Clarke. He knows the future. He's brilliant. The nice thing is, a lot of this stuff that I write about in my book, because it's based on research that's being carried out now, I can check with people who know what they're talking about. And there's a guy in the office next door to me, Justin Reed, who's head of the physics department at Surrey, who is one of the world experts on dark matter. So I would just knock on his door and check, and he'd read through the manuscript and say, are neutrinos possible candidates for dark matter? And he said, yeah, possibly. These are what are called supersymmetric particles. We may discover them at the Large Hadron Collider. We don't know. They're one of a number of candidates. We know dark matter has to be made of something. And we know it's made of something that isn't like anything that normal matter is made of. So it's not made of atoms. It's not made of the particles that make up atoms. It's not made of quarks or electrons, because all those particles feel the electromagnetic force. It can't even be made of just electrically neutral particles, because other stuff, reasons to do with the other nuclear forces that I don't want to go into. So it could be made of neutralinos. So the idea is they have discovered by 2041, they've discovered that dark matter is made of neutralinos. But not only that, they've discovered that dark matter interacts with dark matter. So in accelerators like the Large Hadron Collider, they can make beams of dark matter. And if you fire two beams of dark matter at each other, just like now the Large Hadron Collider, what they do is they accelerate beams of protons, the particles that make up atomic nuclei. And when beams of protons collide, E equals mc squared, see? That mass turns into pure energy, and that energy generates lots of new particles, like the Higgs boson, for example. So that's how they make new particles, by colliding normal particles together. Well, in the story, they collide beams of dark matter together, and that creates energy. So the idea is that they have to deposit this energy at the center of the core of the Earth so that it can be used, it can turn into some seismic wave that sort of kickstarts the Earth's magnetic core. And they've worked out they need to fire beams of dark matter from different locations, in fact, 8 different points around the globe that all meet at a single point, the size of a peppercorn, somewhere in the center of the Earth, where the energy is all completely balanced, annihilate each other, and generate this boom of energy that kickstarts the Earth. So they've done the calculations and it works. The problem is that if any one of those 8 beams fails, then it's all off kilter. So rather than the energy just being deposited in the core, it gets thrown out back radially to the surface and will destroy the Earth. So this is the premise. Scientists know that the Earth is dying and humanity only has a few years left. They have to try and save it. They've got an idea, but if any one of those beams fails, then humanity dies out even more quickly than if we waited around for the magnetic field to die. And of course, there are goodies and baddies, and so there are end-of-worlders, Judgment Day fanatics who are sort of like extreme environmentalists who feel that humanity has destroyed the planet and this is the Earth taking its revenge on us, and therefore they're quite happy for humanity to be wiped out. So they're trying to sabotage the project. So that's the premise of the book. There's a lot of science in there that I'm very pleased with. Some of it, not everyone would appreciate just how pleased I am with it. But obviously, I tell people if they ask. But essentially it's a page-turner. Essentially it's meant to be a thriller. And I think part of that is not the fact that I was so influenced growing up reading the books of Arthur C. Clarke or Isaac Asimov, but reading Stephen King. And Stephen King is a master storyteller. When you get to the end of the chapter, and then it came for him. You want to, it just keeps you gripped. And that was what I found I was quite good at, keeping the reader engaged and through. What I didn't realize, I realized I wasn't so good at, was some of the very basic lessons that you learn as a novelist that had I done a creative writing course, I'd have learnt about. Something called show, don't tell. So anyone who's written any fiction, who's done any creative writing, will know what that means. You don't spell things out, in detail. Let that be told through the characters, through the scene. So my editor was always saying, show, don't tell. And for 8, I just didn't know what he was talking about. What do you mean, show, don't tell? Why can't I say that? Gradually you learn. The other thing I learned was, he keeps saying, mind your POV, your points of view. Apparently, if you are telling the story through the eyes of one of the characters, one of the protagonists, and then someone else suddenly felt really angry, he said, no, you can't say that. How do you know they felt angry? They may have looked angry because you're seeing them through the eyes of someone else. You can't suddenly jump into their eyes and see the world through their eyes, which seemed to me like quite a bit of a pedantic, subtle point. But he said, believe me, a reader, even if they don't know about points of view, that will jar, that will sound awkward. So it was tricks like that I had to learn gradually over the course of the 2.5, 3 years of writing the book. I'm pleased with it. It's sort of done all right. It's still in hardback, so you might be wanting, I can appreciate if you want to wait for the paperback to come out sometime next year. But anyway, you should still buy the hardback. The publishers haven't, I'm not sure if I should be worried about this, that they haven't come back to me and said, what's your next novel going to be, Jim? So whether or not I'll write another one, I'm not sure. I probably will. I've sort of got the bug now, and I sort of feel that steep learning curve of writing fiction, I don't want to waste it. So I might come back to this at a later point. But I am pleased that it has been well received by the people who have read it. And the reason I got this slide up of the cover of the book is only to show off the nice little quote there. But Stephen Baxter is one of my heroes, another fantastic hard sci-fi writer. And so he equates it as somewhere between The Day After Tomorrow and Neuromancer. Brilliant. As soon as he read that, the publisher sent the book to him, he liked it, and he said that. They said, that's going on the front cover. So I don't know if it's helped sales, but I'm very proud of it. So I think I've got, just about 12 minutes or so. I've run out of stuff to say. That's part of the problem of not preparing PowerPoint slides, which will remind you, or actually maybe have some notes, to tell me what to say. So I've finished what I want to say. So with roving mics, and I'm happy to take questions, and I will point to people. So yes, someone in the front row. And then it's probably going to be the front row, my Jim fans.
Hi. You said that you were very proud of some of the science and you'd tell people if they asked. So I'm asking.
Right. Well, one of the things I'm very pleased about is that in 2041, obviously there's drones. There are flying cars, right? Because I know that the first Blade Runner got that wrong because it was flying cars in 2019. But augmented reality is a thing. So now, you'll have heard of Google Glasses maybe, where it's superimposed on your field of vision is something on the lens, so what you look at, it tells you what you're looking at because it can take a picture of it and recognize it and send it through to the internet and back to you. Well, augmented reality by 2041, I predict, will be directly on your retina, so superimposed on your retina. And the way that happens is using a certain type of light-sensitive protein called cryptochrome. Now, it just so happens that part of my research is in this new field of quantum biology, and where there are quantum effects taking place inside living cells. And in fact, I use quantum biology several times in the book, because the other bit is where these monarch butterflies of North America that sense the Earth's magnetic field, and a lot of animals can sense the Earth's magnetic field. Because it's getting weaker, they get lost, and so they drift out of the normal sort of migration pattern. But in augmented reality, even we have this protein in our retina called cryptochrome, and it's light sensitive, so it's utilized by scientists to receive signals from whatever your wrist pad or whatever it is that replaces your smartphone, and you just blink to turn it on. So if you look at someone, you can blink and you can see who they are, because it will identify them. The sort of thing that, I don't know, Black Mirror, for example, does really well. I'm constantly amazed by some of the ingenuity and ideas in Black Mirror. Really, really clever. So I borrowed from my own research area, quantum biology, to predict that cryptochrome will be used in augmented reality. It may happen. And then again, you say, oh yeah, Jim Al-Khalili talked about that years before his time. Amazing man. Yes? Keep talking, it'll probably come on.
Oh, hello. Oh,
there we go.
I really, really enjoyed the book, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Great. I'm currently studying with the Open University and doing a science degree, but I'm also in the process of writing a short story as well. And I was interested in what your process was in writing your characters, whether they were based on people you knew or an amalgamation of people you knew.
The characterization is very interesting, and it's not something that, again, I had any training in. So you write about, your characters are based on people you know, and they're not based on one person. There might be a collection of their personalities are bits and pieces. One of the characters, Sarah Maitland, is based on a solar physicist that I know very well. You may have heard of her, Lucy Green, Professor Lucy Green from UCL. She's presented stuff on TV. Sarah Maitland is basically Lucy Green, but not her. And I had to explain very carefully to Lucy that, Sarah does something that you wouldn't do, that's not you. Years ago, I had a Chinese postdoc, Cheng Zhao, very brilliant particle physicist, went back to Beijing. He heads a big research, theoretical particle physics research group in Beijing. I've got a character in the book, not Cheng Zhao, but Cheng Li, who was a very brilliant particle physicist who worked with the main character. So I start off by thinking I need a character that's probably a bit like so-and-so. And as you write, gradually they become more three-dimensional. What I didn't expect was that at some point, once those characters take on a personality and life of their own, they start arguing with me, sort of almost disagreeing. I want this character to do something, and it's almost as though the character saying, no, I'm not going to do that. You might do that, Jim, but that's not me. Who's writing this book anyway? Come on, yeah. But they really do become people in my head. What I then had to do was make sure that they become people in the reader's heads. Even the unpleasant characters, you need to empathize with them somehow. And so, again, my editor would be constantly telling me, just because I have this imagined universe in my head, the reader has to share it. So you have to have all the sights and sounds and smells, and if I'm there, embedded there, I can imagine it, but unless I put that down on the page, the reader won't. So it's a gradual process. And in writing, it's not the sort of thing that, I can be, giving lectures at university or sitting in some boring meeting and think, I've got an hour and a half, I'll go and write a bit more of the book. No, I had to look weeks in advance and see, okay, Thursday, Friday, nothing on, right, block that off, book writing, and and then I can really immerse myself in that universe. It wasn't an easy thing to do. Right, yes.
Hi, Jim. I just wondered what you felt more nervous about submitting, your very first non-fiction book or this book?
Oh, I'm much more nervous about this one. With non-fiction, you write about what you know, and you are simplifying it because I'm writing popular science, not a textbook. So I'm simplifying it so that people who are not experts in my area can understand it. So I'm very confident that I know more about that subject than the reader. But when you're writing fiction, yes, it's an imagined world, but the craft of fiction writing, it was something that I was very aware I was really naive about and very green. And so writing something that a proper novelist, a proper writer would read and say, that's not bad, wasn't a given. And that's why I was very pleased when that it's been well received so far. So absolutely much more nervous about how this book would fare compared with non-fiction.
Hi, Jim. I'm 11 years old, and so I have a question. What age would you class your books aimed at?
Sorry, what age?
Would you say that your book is like aimed for?
What's aim? Oh, well, there's the rude bits in it are rude words. So it depends if parents think their kids should be exposed to rude words. Is about, if you strip out the rude words, any age. But yeah, maybe there should be some. But then, that's not. It's weird, isn't it? When a scientist gives a lecture, I'm not swearing today because I know there are young members in the audience. Scientists don't swear, and you'd be very shocked if you heard a scientist swear. But then you'd watch some Hollywood movie, and you just take it for granted. It's strange that where swear words are allowed or not. So there are no swear words, obviously, in my non-fiction books, but in this, there are a few. So check with your parents, is what I would say. Is there any more here? Oh, there's two down the middle. Oh, right, okay, there's another one there. How are we doing for time? We've got about 3 minutes. A minute each.
Hi there. Hi, Jim. Looking forward to reading it very much. Just wondering, you were talking about dark matter and your neighbour who knows a bit more about it. What's the current state of thinking on what it might be? Have you got anything else to...
Well, there are a number of candidate particles. We think dark matter is made of some kind of matter particle that interacts gravitationally. There are all sorts of weird and wonderful names of hypothetical particles, axions, WIMPs, supersymmetric particles. We simply don't know. It's quite frustrating because on the one hand, we become more and more certain that dark matter exists. Computer simulations suggest the universe wouldn't exist in the state it is now without dark matter. So we are very, very confident that dark matter is real. There isn't any other explanation, like modifying the laws of the force of gravity. That just wouldn't work. And yet, at the same time, it's quite frustrating that we have yet to discover these dark matter particles. It was, for example, hoped that the Large Hadron Collider may have by now discovered what are called supersymmetric particles, of which the dark matter particle, like a neutrino, is just one of a family of new particles. We've not discovered any supersymmetric particles yet. And it doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means that we haven't found how to make them with the right energy yet. So you talk to different experts in dark matter, and they will tell you what their favorite candidate particle is. But it's sort of a guess at the moment, as long as it satisfies certain criteria. We just have to keep on trying. We try and capture dark matter particles from space. We try and see them behaving out in space and what they do. And we try and make them afresh in particle accelerators here on Earth. There are 3 ways of studying dark matter. None of them yet has yielded the secrets of what it's made of. But it'll happen. It'll come. Right, so there were... Oh, right, okay, the microphone's there. Okay, yes? And then we'll have to have the last one in the middle.
Hi, Jim. It's really nice to meet you. I just wanted to ask you, what is your thought on Donald Trump not accepting that climate change is real when every single person in the universe knows that it is actually a real thing?
Yeah. If Donald Trump wasn't the president of the United States, we could all just safely ignore him as a clown. But yeah, I mean, it's very dangerous. It's difficult. It's difficult to do. Sometimes, I mean, Dallas in the last event, talking to James Burke, said there's a rise of conspiracy theorists. People think the Earth is flat. There seems to be a group of people, maybe sort of encouraged by social media, who believe in very strange ideas, and obviously it's dangerous. It's anti-science. You know, climate, not believing that we have a crisis that we have to do something about is terrible. It's very, very dangerous. But as are other things, it's dangerous, you know, if you're an anti-vaxxer. It's maybe not so dangerous if you think the Earth is flat, or that what we're celebrating this weekend, actually man didn't go to the moon at all. That's sort of quaint, it's very silly, but quaint and harmless. What do I think about climate change? I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified of what is happening, and something has to happen. And I mean, things like the Extinction Rebellion movement raised awareness in a way that adults haven't been able to do for long enough. So I think something has to happen, but it has to come from governments. And when you have a leader of the most powerful country in the world who doesn't believe in it, I mean, you can get very depressed very quickly. So one just hopes that, you know, he will be a footnote in history and can be forgotten about as an aberration in humankind's history. Right. That's time. I'm sorry, you had your hands up for so long, but we've run out of time. Sorry, thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much, Professor Jim Al-Khalili. Please we give Jim a huge round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.